Can you tell us the story of how Madison and Jefferson came to the belief that religious liberty, the concept of religious liberty, should be embedded into the Constitution?
Yes, it's a great story. It's, I think, an example of that prudence and that courage that was so much a part of the founding of this country. So Madison saw grave injustice in the area around which he grew up and where he had returned to after college. He saw that Baptists were not being treated in a way that was worthy of human dignity. And they were sometimes fined, even imprisoned. Some of them were beaten up because they had the audacity to practice their religious beliefs as their conscience was telling them. And again, this was not contrary to the common good. It wasn't running afoul of anything but the Anglican establishment. And so taxpayer dollars propped up the Anglican Church in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And Madison saw that as a real problem. And he said, I want to do something about that. And what he figured out is that he could, with the aid of Thomas Jefferson, who was 8 years his senior, craft a piece of legislation. Jefferson drafted it, they introduced it, and the idea was that gradually they would lift the established religion from the backs of all taxpayers in the Commonwealth of Virginia. In other words, there wouldn't be one official sect that would dominate and that would be able to receive taxpayer funding. And what happened is they faced some opposition because people like Patrick Henry said, you know what, we really need this kind of taxpayer-supported religious establishment because kids were really not towing the moral line. Right. And Madison said, well, that may be true, but is it really going to be an effective thing for the state to force people against their will to practice a particular faith? Is that going to get to the place where we all want to be? Is that going to conduce, in other words, to the common good, to the unum? Right. Because you can beat people out of being Baptist. You can beat people out of being a particular faith or beat them into having some sort of faith. Right. But what have you done in the process? You've lost your liberty and you've imposed tyranny. So the question then is, how do we have an accommodation of the multiplicity of interests, of professions of belief or non-belief? How do we do that in a plural context? And Jefferson and Madison came together, hatched a plan, and it took a lot of courage to do that because the key political forces in the Commonwealth of Virginia were arrayed against them. Right. You know, it got so bad at one point, Jefferson's over in Paris. He had proposed the legislation. It had languished because Henry was very powerful and could keep the legislation from passing. Okay, and Jefferson writes his friend Madison and says, what we need to do, here I'm quoting Thomas Jefferson, is, quote, devoutly pray for Patrick Henry to die.
Wow.
Yes, so anytime you think that the
That's
Founding
awful.
Fathers agreed on everything, it wasn't the case. There were big disagreements.
Right.
But what they did, Jefferson and Madison, was continue that fight, laying the groundwork, trying to persuade their fellow citizens, and issuing these really interesting, what we would see kind of now as blog postings, right. These circulars that were put all around the Commonwealth that argued we need to have religious liberty. Not where a majority just merely puts up with the minority, and when they get tired of putting up with them, they kick them out or do whatever they want because they have the power. Right. We need real religious liberty. And it took 7-8 years before that legislation finally was adopted. But when it did, what they set in motion was really the idea that you can't use the state to exercise tyranny over the human mind and heart. And that was really an amazing accomplishment because not only did it take a lot of courage, but think of all of the different steps in that process. Right. They could have given up, right? But what they did is they were prudent because they saw a just end and they figured out these are the means that it's going to take. This is the coalition that we're going to have to pull together. Because by the end of it, they had not only Baptists, but they had lots of other denominations. They had free thinkers. They had folks that were not part of any religious establishment at all. And they'd come together to say that this is something that's so important because we value, we esteem our fellow citizens who are religious, we esteem those who are not, and we want to write into the law of the Commonwealth of Virginia this idea that all human beings are created equal.